I'm a 34-year-old woman, and I've always been the responsible one in my family. My sister, Rachel, is a few years younger than me and has always been more unpredictable. Rachel had her daughter, Clara, when she was young. Our parents stepped in to help, concerned from the start about Rachel's ability to raise a child on her own. They did what they could to support her, but it was clear from the beginning that Rachel struggled to hold things together. And so, as far back as I can remember, I started stepping in to help too. Clara and I bonded early on. She'd come to my place on weekends, and I'd take her to school events, piano recitals, even her soccer practices. In a way, I became like a second parent to her, a consistent figure who showed up. I'd make it to her events when Rachel was too busy or when she canceled last-minute plans. Rachel had an on and off relationship with stability, bouncing between jobs and relationships, and sometimes disappearing for a while. When things got rough, Clara would often end up with me or our parents. Rachel's life continued to be unpredictable. She often dated men who didn't stick around long and held down jobs just long enough to get by before moving on. There were times she'd prioritize her social life, leaving Clara in the care of others. I watched all this happen, feeling more and more helpless each time. When Clara was 6, I couldn't help but think maybe it would be better for her to live with me full-time. I brought up the idea of adoption to Rachel, suggesting she let me take over the responsibility so Clara could have the stability she needed. Rachel's response was angry and defensive. She accused me of trying to steal her daughter, insisting she was capable of handling it herself. Our relationship took a hit after that. Even though she rejected the idea, I stayed close to Clara, doing my best to give her the support she needed without pushing Rachel away any further. Rachel's struggles continued over the years, though. Her life was like a revolving door of jobs and relationships that brought instability into Clara's life. I was still there, stepping in whenever I could, trying to make sure Clara didn't fall through the cracks. But there was only so much I could do without overstepping. I knew Rachel didn't appreciate my involvement and saw it as interference. But what could I do? Clara needed a steady presence in her life, someone who wouldn't disappear when things got tough. As Clara got older, her struggles became more obvious. By the time she was around 12, she was showing signs of anxiety and withdrawing into herself. Her schoolwork began to suffer, and I noticed she'd lost interest in the activities she used to love. It was like watching a light go out in her. I worried constantly but felt trapped, unable to fully step in without risking an even bigger fallout with Rachel. At 12, I brought up the idea of adoption with Rachel again. This time, the fallout was even worse. Rachel shut me out completely for months, claiming I was trying to undermine her role as Clara's mother. She couldn't see that it wasn't about taking something from her. It was about giving Clara the stability she desperately needed. But the more I tried to step in, the harder Rachel resisted, leaving me feeling like my hands were tied. Still, I stayed in touch with Clara. I'd invite her over as much as possible, letting her know my door was always open. She'd call or text when things got tough, sometimes just to hear a voice that didn't judge or ignore her. At one point, I suggested to Rachel that Clara might benefit from therapy, hoping a counselor could give her an outlet and a safe space to work through her feelings. But Rachel dismissed it immediately, saying therapy was unnecessary and expensive. I felt helpless, watching Clara's struggles deepen while Rachel refused to see the need for outside support. Over the next few years, Clara started depending on me more and more. She'd call late at night when she was upset or ask if she could stay with me for the weekend, just to get a break. But this reliance on me didn't come without consequences. It seemed like the closer Clara got to me, the more tension grew between her and her mom. Their arguments became more frequent, with Rachel labeling Clara's behavior as rebellious rather than recognizing her daughter's pain. In those years, I became Clara's confidante. She'd tell me about her troubles at home, the things she was afraid to say to her mom. I could tell she was struggling, but my ability to help was limited without Rachel's cooperation. Family members started weighing in, too. Some thought I should let Rachel handle her own parenting, no matter how flawed it was, while others quietly agreed that Clara might be better off with me. The last time I offered to adopt Clara was when she was around 16. I could see that the situation at home wasn't improving, and her emotional state was getting worse. I wanted to give her a safe, stable home where she wouldn't feel abandoned or dismissed. But once again, Rachel refused, seeing it as a betrayal. She insisted that she could be the parent Clara needed and accused me of trying to drive a wedge between them. And so, here we are. I'm still watching from the sidelines, hoping for the best but fearing the worst. But I can't ignore it any longer. This isn't just about Rachel and me, it's about giving Clara a chance to have a life where she feels supported and seen. The weight of that responsibility is something I'm finally ready to carry, even if it means facing conflict head-on. Update 1. Clara's behavior took a turn not long after she turned 16. She started skipping classes, avoiding family gatherings, and spending hours shut away in her room or wandering off to who knows where. Her teachers noticed first, calling to inform me, her emergency contact, that she hadn't been attending consistently and that her grades were slipping fast. They sounded concerned, saying she used to be bright and engaged, but now she hardly spoke up and struggled to focus. Hearing it from them made the situation feel more urgent. When I tried to talk to Rachel about it, she brushed it off, saying Clara was just going through a teenage phase. According to her, every teenager had moments of rebellion, and Clara's current behavior was nothing to worry about. She even went so far as to imply that I was coddling her, that maybe I was the reason Clara was acting dramatic. It felt like I was talking to a brick wall. Rachel refused to see that Clara's problems ran deeper than just normal teenage angst. The pattern continued. More calls from the school, more missed assignments. Every time I tried to step in, Rachel made me feel like I was crossing a line, so I kept quiet about the details with her, managing what I could on my own. I reached out to Clara's teachers, assuring them that I'd help her catch up, trying to keep her from falling too far behind. But every time I offered Rachel help directly, she turned it down, insisting she didn't need me interfering in her family's life. Clara was pulling away from everyone, really. She'd barely speak to Rachel and only opened up to me in bits and pieces. It was clear she was feeling lost, misunderstood, and unsupported. She even started posting vague messages online, stuff about feeling trapped, unseen, and wanting to be somewhere else. I stumbled on her social media posts one day and felt a chill. Her words hinted at a level of loneliness and pain that she'd never shared with me directly. The fact that she was seeking validation from strangers worried me. When I brought it up to Rachel, she snapped, accusing me of invading Clara's privacy and blowing things out of proportion. To her, I was stirring up drama. That conversation ended the same way every other one had, with Rachel brushing off any suggestion that Clara needed real help. She refused to acknowledge what was happening right in front of her, and any attempt to bring it up only made her dig her heels in deeper. In a last-ditch effort, I reached out to a family counselor. I thought maybe a professional could help Rachel see what I was seeing, but Rachel flat out refused, saying therapy was a waste of time and money. I didn't know what else to do. Every attempt to help just added fuel to the fire between us. The situation boiled over one night. After another argument between Rachel and me over what was best for Clara ran away. She showed up on my doorstep around midnight, looking exhausted and broken down. She said she couldn't stay at home anymore, that she felt suffocated and invisible. There was something about the way she spoke. She didn't sound angry or defiant, just worn out, like she'd reached her breaking point. I let her stay with me for a few days, hoping it would give Rachel some perspective. But Rachel was furious. She accused me of undermining her authority and stealing her daughter. When I explained that Clara had come to me on her own, she refused to believe it, insisting I'd somehow manipulated her into leaving. It became clear that this situation wasn't going to resolve itself, so I reached out to a lawyer about the possibility of seeking guardianship. I knew it would be a challenging and messy path, especially with Rachel's resistance, but I didn't see any other way to protect Clara. She needed stability and support, and it was obvious Rachel wasn't providing that. As word spread through the family, everyone seemed to have an opinion. Some family members thought I was overstepping, saying that no matter how bad things were, Rachel was still Clara's mother, and I should stay out of it. Others quietly supported my decision, agreeing that Clara's well-being should come first, even if it meant family conflict. Rachel, of course, couldn't see it that way. Instead, she doubled down, telling anyone who would listen that I'd poisoned Clara against her. She twisted the situation to make herself seem like the victim, claiming I was the one causing a rift between her and Clara. In her mind, I wasn't trying to help, I was tearing her family apart. Every time I tried to address Clara's needs, Rachel twisted it into an attack against her. The division in the family only grew, with some members convinced I was overreacting, while others quietly took my side, worried about Clara's future. No matter how much I tried to reason with Rachel, it was clear she wasn't going to see things from any perspective but her own. She insisted that everything was fine, that Clara just needed tough love, and that my attempts to meddle were only making things worse. But I knew what I saw. I saw a young girl slipping further into herself, reaching out in small, desperate ways that her mother refused to acknowledge. So with the family still split and Rachel's accusations hanging over me, I made a decision. I was going to fight for Clara. Update 2. Clara had no interest in going back home. She told me clearly that she felt safer and more supported at my place, where she didn't feel constantly judged or neglected. Her hesitation wasn't a rebellious whim. She was genuinely afraid of the chaos waiting for her if she returned to her mom's house. It was a relief to hear her say that, even though it made the path forward harder. Not long after, Rachel started bombarding me with messages, demanding I send Clara back immediately. She threatened to take legal action, accusing me of brainwashing her daughter and trying to steal her away. She saw my efforts to help Clara as an attack, completely disregarding her daughter's needs. At first, I tried reasoning with her, explaining that Clara needed stability, but Rachel wouldn't hear it. Her threats turned into demands and her accusations grew louder. Eventually, I realized there was no way this would end peacefully. And that's when I decided to file for guardianship. It wasn't an easy choice, knowing it would cause a rift in the family and push Rachel even further away. But every sign pointed to Clara needing a stable home and consistent support, neither of which Rachel could provide right now. I took the plunge, gathering all the necessary paperwork and evidence showing Rachel's instability and Clara's struggles. The day Rachel found out, she came over, shouting that I was destroying her life. She claimed I was only doing this out of spite to punish her for past disagreements. Her words were loud, raw, and full of anger. She accused me of manipulating her daughter, insisting that Clara was only acting out because of my influence. I stood firm, letting her vent, but didn't back down. This wasn't about our past, it was about Clara's future, and I couldn't let Rachel's denial stand in the way. Clara, meanwhile, was struggling with the guilt of it all. She hated the idea of her family fighting, and I could see the conflict weighing heavily on her, even as she stayed adamant about her choice to live with me. I tried my best to reassure her, setting up counseling sessions to help her process everything. Slowly, she started to open up more and find some stability. It was a small but significant change in her, one that helped to reaffirm I was making the right decision. The temporary guardianship order came through soon after. The court granted me temporary custody of Clara while they evaluated her best interests in the longer term. Rachel, predictably, was furious, insisting that the system was rigged and that I had somehow tricked everyone into siding with me. Family tensions skyrocketed. Relatives took sides, some fully supporting my decision, while others labeled it a betrayal. My parents and a few others thought I was overstepping, that I should just let Rachel parent Clara, even if her choices were questionable. But others could see how much better Clara was doing with me. Rachel, not one to let things go quietly, took to social media. She painted a picture of a vindictive brother stealing her child, claiming I had manipulated the court system to break up her family. She posted about the injustice of it all, attracting sympathy from people who didn't know the full story. The responses were mixed, with some family friends and acquaintances offering support to her, but others messaging me privately to say they understood my side and encouraged me to stay strong. Meanwhile, Clara was thriving. With the security of a stable home, her school performance started improving noticeably. Teachers reached out to say they were seeing positive changes in her, and she seemed more engaged and focused. I couldn't have asked for better evidence to support our case as the court date approached. Seeing Clara gain back her confidence and reconnect with her interests made all the stress worth it. Rachel didn't back down, though. She showed up at my place one evening, demanding to take Clara back. She created a scene outside my house, shouting that I was a liar and a manipulator, accusing me of brainwashing her daughter. Neighbors noticed, and I had to calmly ask her to leave, knowing that engaging with her anger would only make things worse. Rachel left, but not before vowing to fix this mess I had created. Finally, we received the official court hearing date to determine if my guardianship would become permanent. The atmosphere grew tense. Rachel knew the stakes were high, and so did I. A few days before the hearing, Rachel approached me in a rare moment of calm, saying she would change if I dropped the case. She insisted that she was willing to do whatever it takes to be a better mother, as long as Clara came back to her. But after years of watching her struggle with the same cycles, I wasn't convinced. I told her that if she wanted Clara back, she would have to prove it to the court. Clara prepared for the hearing too. She knew she would need to speak about her experiences, something she dreaded but felt was necessary. We talked about it, and she resolved to share her story honestly, no matter how difficult it might be. It was clear she was conflicted. No one wants to have to take a stand against their own parent, but she also knew this was her chance to be heard. She was determined to make her voice count, and I promised to be there every step of the way. As the day of the hearing approached, the stakes felt higher than ever. The family was still divided, Rachel was digging her heels in deeper, and Clara was preparing to share her truth. It was a tipping point, and there was no turning back. Update 3. The court hearing day finally arrived, a tense culmination of all the emotional buildup, family drama, and legal preparation. Both Rachel and I showed up, each of us ready to present our case to determine what was best for Clara's future. The courtroom felt thick with tension, and the stakes were clear to everyone involved. Clara was called to testify first. She stood, looking small but determined, and started speaking about her experiences. She didn't hold back. She described the chaos of her life at home, the instability that left her feeling like she was always on edge, and the ways in which she had started to withdraw from everything, because it felt like she had no safe place to turn. She explained how much living with me had helped her, giving her the stability she had been missing for so long. She emphasized that she felt safe and supported with me, which was something she desperately needed. When it was Rachel's turn, she launched into a defensive narrative, portraying herself as a dedicated mother who had been unfairly maligned. She claimed that my involvement had only served to damage her relationship with Clara, arguing that my presence and interference had caused more harm than good. She painted a picture of herself as a misunderstood single mother doing her best, insisting that she could handle her responsibilities, and that my actions had only undermined her authority as Clara's mother. After Rachel's testimony, it was my turn to present the evidence. I submitted documentation showing the improvements in Clara's school performance since she'd started living with me, along with reports from her therapist which outlined the positive changes in her emotional stability. I also provided evidence of Rachel's history of instability, job changes, erratic relationships, and the numerous times Clara had been left with family members, not because of an emergency, but because Rachel simply hadn't been able to keep up. The evidence showed a clear pattern, one that I hoped would help the court see that this wasn't just a phase or a minor family disagreement. To strengthen our cases, each of us had family members testify on our behalf. Some relatives stepped forward to support me, confirming the history of instability in Rachel's life. They spoke about Clara's struggles and how she'd become withdrawn and anxious over the years. However, others chose to back Rachel, claiming that she was fully capable of raising Clara and that I was overstepping my bounds. It was painful to see the family divided like this, with people I loved forced to pick sides. The judge didn't say much during the testimonies but looked concerned as she listened to Rachel describe her parenting. After hearing from all the witnesses, the judge voiced her own concerns. She pointed out that Rachel seemed unwilling to accept that Clara had emotional needs that weren't being met, and she questioned Rachel's refusal to seek counseling for her daughter. She also addressed Rachel's quickness to blame others for her problems rather than taking accountability. During a short break, Rachel lost her temper and came at me in the hallway, yelling that I was ruining her life. She accused me of being a liar, a manipulator, and someone out to destroy her. Her outburst was loud enough to draw attention from court officials and our family members, who looked on, clearly disturbed. Rachel's words weren't controlled or measured. They were pure, raw anger, pouring out in a way that only made the situation feel more tragic. The judge saw what had happened and decided to take extra precautions, ordering a psychological evaluation for both Rachel and me to help determine who was more suited to care for Clara. This wasn't something I'd anticipated, but I agreed without hesitation, hoping that whatever the outcome, it would help show the court what was truly best for Clara. After the hearing, Clara seemed torn. She looked relieved that the truth was finally coming out, but I could tell she felt guilty too. This wasn't an easy decision for her. Breaking away from her mother, even with all the chaos, was painful. Rachel only added to that pain by trying to manipulate Clara whenever she could. She would send messages pleading with Clara to come back, promising she would change and make things better. Clara, however, was firm in her decision to stay with me, even as Rachel tried to sway her. To help Clara process everything, I set up more frequent counseling sessions, hoping it would provide her with a safe space to unpack her feelings about her mother and the ongoing court case. Slowly, she seemed to become more grounded, though the situation was still far from easy for her. After weeks of waiting, the evaluations were complete, and the final hearing date was set. The anticipation weighed heavily on all of us. Rachel, in a last-ditch attempt, posted a lengthy rant on social media, accusing me of masterminding a vindictive family scheme against her. She painted herself as the victim, garnering sympathy from people who only knew her side of the story. Her post stirred up a lot of attention, and while some people offered support, others saw through the facade, privately reaching out to me with messages of encouragement. Finally, after weeks of waiting and deliberation, the judge made her ruling. She granted me permanent guardianship over Clara, a decision that felt like a monumental step forward for both of us. Rachel sat there, visibly devastated. The court's decision had dealt her a painful defeat, one that would change her relationship with her daughter forever. The outcome was bittersweet, but it meant Clara would have a stable, supportive home where she could feel safe. In that moment, all the stress, arguments, and family drama felt worth it. Clara and I walked out of that courtroom together, knowing we'd reached the end of a long, challenging journey, one that finally led to a new beginning for both of us. Update 4. After the judge's decision, Clara and I returned to our new life together, trying to adjust to the reality of her being under my guardianship. The transition wasn't simple. While Clara finally felt stable and safe, the emotional weight of the whole situation lingered. Some days she seemed relieved and almost happy, diving into her schoolwork and hobbies. Other times I could see the sadness in her, a sense of guilt over her mother that she couldn't shake, even though she knew this was the right choice. Despite the court ruling, Rachel couldn't let go. She called and messaged Clara frequently, reminding her of all the things that had gone wrong and blaming me for tearing the family apart. Her messages often came late at night, filling Clara's phone with emotional pleas and guilt-tripping lines about how she'd been abandoned. Rachel wanted Clara to feel responsible for everything, as if she were the one who caused the rift between us. It was affecting Clara, and I could see the stress building every time her phone buzzed. I realized boundaries had to be set. I spoke to Rachel directly, insisting that she respect the court's decision and give Clara some space. I made it clear that if she continued this way, it would only push Clara further away. The court had even suggested that Rachel seek counseling if she wanted to rebuild her relationship with her daughter, but she dismissed the idea, saying it wasn't necessary, and that she'd find another way. For her, the idea of counseling was more of an insult than an opportunity for growth. As time passed, I could see Clara starting to heal in little ways. Away from the instability, she was gradually becoming more open and confident. Her grades improved significantly. Teachers reached out to comment on how focused and engaged she had become. She started participating more in her classes and even began joining after-school clubs. It was clear that the steady, supportive environment was helping her rediscover interests that had been buried under years of stress and chaos. But Rachel's messages kept coming, piling on the guilt. Clara tried to ignore them, but it was hard, especially when Rachel kept reminding her that she had abandoned her own mother. I reassured Clara that she was doing what was best for herself, but the emotional toll still weighed on her. To counter this, I reached out to family members and friends, creating a support network for her. Having positive influences around made a huge difference, showing her that she wasn't alone in this journey, and that people genuinely cared about her well-being. To celebrate her achievements, I made a point of acknowledging every milestone she hit, big or small. Whether it was a good grade, a new hobby, or just a positive step forward, I let her know how proud I was. These small celebrations helped lift her spirits and reinforced that she was on the right path. I wanted her to know she had a home where her progress mattered and where her efforts would always be recognized. Surprisingly, Rachel occasionally complied with the boundaries we set. There were moments when she agreed to meet with Clara in a supervised setting, where I could monitor the interaction and ensure that the visit was healthy and constructive. I allowed these visits cautiously, knowing that Clara still cared for her mother and wanted some connection. During these times, Rachel would show hints of willingness to play by the rules, but they were always brief. She'd slip back into guilt-tripping and reminders of how ungrateful Clara was for leaving her. The family tension persisted. Some relatives still disagreed with my decision, subtly questioning whether it was right for me to take Clara away from her mother. Their words, though not openly confrontational, lingered and created an undercurrent of strain. But others, who had witnessed the positive changes in Clara, privately supported my choice, expressing relief that she was finally in a safe, stable environment. These quiet validations helped me stay focused on what truly mattered, Clara's well-being. As she became more comfortable, Clara started building friendships at school, something she hadn't been able to do before. She went from being withdrawn and hesitant to feeling secure enough to reach out to others. It was like watching her blossom, finally feeling grounded enough to put herself out there without fear of the chaos waiting for her at home. Her new friendships helped her work through the leftover emotional baggage, reminding her that she was in control of her own life. Rachel's influence over Clara began to dwindle over time. The messages became fewer, and Clara responded less frequently, finding her footing in her new life. As she grew stronger and more independent, it became clear that Rachel's hold on her was loosening. Clara didn't need the constant reminders of guilt. She was ready to let go of the past and focus on building a future. Looking back, it was a long road to get here, but every step was worth it to see Clara finally free from the weight she'd been carrying for so long. We had both found some semblance of peace, despite the challenges. Update 5. Over time, Clara began to reflect on everything that had happened. She started to understand the limitations her mother faced and accepted that, despite how painful it was, her choice to live with me had been necessary. She could see the difference in her life now, the calm, the predictability, and it gave her a new sense of security. She'd talk about her past in counseling, opening up about her complicated feelings toward Rachel, and these sessions helped her come to terms with the family dynamics in a healthy way. One afternoon, Rachel reached out, saying she wanted to talk. She mentioned making amends, acknowledging she'd lost her way. While I couldn't be certain of her motives, I agreed to arrange a meeting between her and Clara in a neutral, controlled environment. When the day came, Rachel appeared more subdued than I'd seen her in a long time. She apologized to Clara, saying she regretted her mistakes and wanted a chance to rebuild their relationship. But Clara was cautious, hesitant to fully trust her mother again. The damage had been deep, and though she listened, she was wary. Clara shared her thoughts with her therapist afterward, slowly coming to terms with the complicated feelings she had for her mother. Therapy was helping her understand her own boundaries, and I could see she was becoming more grounded with each session. She was learning to accept the love she had for Rachel while recognizing that distance was necessary for her own peace. The boundaries I'd set with Rachel were finally paying off. Rachel, maybe realizing that pushing too hard was only driving Claire further away, began to respect those boundaries. The accusatory messages and late-night guilt tripping gradually stopped. Rachel even stopped posting about the situation on social media, signaling that she was starting to accept the reality. Without the constant emotional barrage, Clara found a chance to breathe and focus on her life. Interestingly, some family members who'd once been skeptical started coming around. They'd begun to see the positive changes in Clara and recognize the impact that stability had on her. Quietly, a few reached out, acknowledging that maybe they hadn't fully understood the situation before. There was still tension with some relatives, but the shift was a relief. Family events became less contentious, and there was a gradual sense of healing that wasn't there before. As Clara settled into her new life, she started dreaming about her future. She talked about college and career possibilities with an excitement I hadn't seen before. The idea of a future that was entirely hers brought a spark back to her eyes. With encouragement, she began exploring her options, researching programs, and imagining the life she could build. I felt proud to watch her think about the future with so much hope, a far cry from the withdrawn, anxious girl she had been just months before. Meanwhile, Rachel showed small signs of change as well. She found stable work and, after much hesitation, started attending therapy. Family members mentioned she seemed less defensive, even regretful about how things had turned out. Though the change was slow, it was a relief to hear that she was at least trying to address her issues. For Clara, this was a quiet assurance that maybe, with time, their relationship could find some stability, even if things would never go back to the way they once were. Clara reached a point where she was finally at peace with our guardianship arrangement. She understood that she could still love her mother while living with me, and she didn't have to carry the burden of responsibility for Rachel's choices. This acceptance gave her a newfound sense of freedom. She was living her own life, but she knew that Rachel, in her own way, would still be a part of it, even if from a distance. As a final step toward closure, I suggested the idea of family therapy sessions for both Clara and Rachel. Rachel hesitated at first, but agreed to consider it. Clara seemed open to the idea, seeing it as a way to work through any lingering issues in a safe, guided environment. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it offered them both a structured path forward. With Clara's graduation on the horizon, I decided to throw a celebration for her achievements. It was a day to recognize how far she had come and to honor the resilience she'd shown through everything. We invited close friends and supportive family members who had been there for her during her journey. Rachel attended too, showing up quietly and, for once, without causing any drama. She stayed on the sidelines, watching with a sort of reserved pride as Clara enjoyed her moment. Seeing her family gathered to celebrate her success brought Clara a new level of happiness. It was a reminder that she had a support system, that despite everything, she was not alone. Rachel's presence, though subtle, was significant. It showed that maybe, with time, the fractures in our family could start to heal. Reflecting on the whole journey, I realized how important those boundaries had been. Setting limits and standing firm hadn't been easy, but they had protected both Clara and me. Those boundaries allowed us to move forward without the constant pull of old patterns dragging us down. I knew, without a doubt, that despite all the difficult decisions, I'd made the right choices to ensure Clara's well-being. With the dust finally settling, Clara and I continued our lives together, stronger for everything we'd been through. Our family remained complex, and there were still challenges to face, but for the first time in a long time, we had stability. We'd found peace, and that was something neither of us was willing to let go of.